Hello, this is Hamlet with Webucator. In this video, I'm going to show you different ways of using the for loop in JavaScript. This is based on an article by Benny from openjs.com. Benny has agreed to let us create this video showing his tutorial, which is available on his blog at the URL shown on your screen. Now, as you may already know, for loops are the most widely used type of loop in just about any language. What you may not know, however, is that there are different ways to iterate a for loop. We'll be discussing these different methods, along with the pros and cons of each. So let's go ahead and get started. As you can see, I have Dreamweaver already open with a simple HTML5 document, and this is where we're going to be testing the different variations of the for loop. Let me scroll up a little bit actually. So on line 9, you can see that we have a very simple array that we're going to play with, and it is constructed of 3 simple items, 1, 2, 3. So let's go ahead and loop this array the old-fashioned way. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this. So I'm going to say for var I equals 0. And then as long as I is less than the length of the array, and increment I by 1. So let's do something. While looping the array, we're going to set up our value for the item in the array. And whoops, we have an extra A. Okay. And then we're going to alert that out. Concatenate that to the value of our value variable. So let's see how that works. We're going to preview that in the browser. So I equals 1, 2, and 3. Perfect. Okay, so nothing fancy here. This is the most widely used method for looping a for loop. Now, the problem here is that JavaScript has to look up the length of the array every single time it iterates the loop. Now, for a for loop, this is not an issue. For a small array, this is not an issue. But if the array gets big enough, then it will slow down the script. So let's do a more optimized version of the loop. What I'm going to do is I'm going to comment this out so that when we test our script again, this part doesn't get executed anymore, but rather the section that we are looking at, which is right now the more optimized version. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say var len equals array length, and we'll see why in a minute. I'm doing it this way now. Then I'm going to loop as we did previously. I'm going to say I equals 0, I is less than len, which was already declared here on line 18. And then I'm going to say the same thing, var value equals the item in the array, and then I will alert that out. Actually, I'm just going to copy it and paste it from up here. Okay, so let's this should do the same on the browser. Let's confirm that. I equals 1, I equals 2, and I equals 3. Okay, very good. So here we get the length of the array only once, and we put in a variable. And so because we only get it once, it makes the script runs faster. Now do know that this only works if the length of the array doesn't change during the looping. Alright, so let's see how we can also loop the array going in reversed order. What I'm going to do is comment this out and scroll below a little bit, and I'll start here. So here I will say var I equals array.length minus 1. And because I'm going backwards now, I'm going to say while I is greater than or equal to 0. And then instead of incrementing, I will be decrementing the I variable. And then I will say var value equals array. I'll just copy it and paste from above. Line 26 is really the only thing that changed here. And so now when I preview this in the browser, it should say alert I equals 3, then 2, and then 1, essentially going backwards. Let's double check. And there it is, I equals 3, then 2, and then 1. Okay. Now, this can only be used when order is not a factor. So here we find the length of the array when the loop is first initialized. And so what happens is it will only need to happen once instead of every time during each iteration. All right, so now let's move on to the next method of looping with a for loop, and that is inline looping. Now for inline looping, we can actually do it two ways. We can do it in the right order, and we can do it in reversed order. So first, to do it in the right order, let's see how that would go. We would say var I equals 0, comma, then the length of the array is going to be array.length, and that initializes the for loop. Then I'm going to say value equals array I while I is less than length, then increment I by 1, and then I will alert out the value of the item in the array. So I just copied and pasted from above, and let's see, that looks about right. Let's preview it in the browser. So I equals 1, 2, and 3. Very good. And now we'll do something similar in reversed order. So what I'm going to do is just copy it and paste from above. And there is a small modification that we'll need to do so that it's reversed. So now we're going to say instead of I equals 0, instead of starting at the beginning of the array, we're going to start at the end. So we're going to say I equals the length of the array minus 1. And then we're going to say value equals array of I. That looks good. And then I greater than or equal to 0. And because we're doing it backwards, we have to decrement I, and then we alert out the value. Let's make sure that that works. I equals 3, then 2, and then 1. Okay, very well. So this will let you assign the current value and the length of the array within the for loop, or I should specify within the for statement itself. Now, from the perspective of JavaScript, this works great. The only downside to it is that if someone is looking at your code, it may take them a bit to wrap their head around it. So, all of the methods that we've seen are designed for numerical arrays. But to iterate through an associative array, you need a for in loop, which is a slight variation of the for loop. Although the for in loop is typically used for iterating through an associative array, it can still be used for numerical arrays as well. The for in loop is much like a for each loop that you may have seen in PHP and other languages, but with a small difference. The key is returned instead of the value. So let's see what that looks like. I'm going to say for var I in my array, var value equals array of I, and then alert I equals my value concatenated. Okay, so let's see what that looks like in the browser. I equals 3. Oops, actually, we forgot to comment out this part here. And it looks like we were getting an undefined error message. Let's see what that is about. Okay, I see. We have a typo in value. So that looks good now. Okay, there it is. I equals 1, 2, and 3. And so that is how we would do an associative array as well. And so that is it for this presentation. I hope you found it helpful. Thanks again to Benny for letting us create this video on this tutorial showing the different methods of using the for loop in JavaScript.